Hello everyone, welcome to my channel, Garden Well, Eat Well. I'm Paul, your host, and today I'm going to show you exactly how to save and recover these long leggy seedlings with complete success. You won't be disappointed. So what do I mean when I talk about seedlings that are leggy and spindly? Well, here are some examples. These are young tomato plants, just germinated maybe a week ago. They've both been growing the same amount of time. Obviously, when you look at them, the big difference is their height. These shorter ones are growing like a normal tomato should. They are strong and well supported. When you brush them, they bounce back quickly. But these other ones, they barely can support themselves. They have an insanely long stem. So why is there such a discrepancy when they've both been growing the same amount of time? After a seed germinates and you start seeing it poke out of the soil, it needs to get its leaves facing the sun to start growing properly. Direct sunlight's always the best. The stem will point the leaves so they are able to catch as much sunlight as possible, but if you're growing your tomatoes under artificial lights or grow lights, which aren't bright enough, the plants will go to extremes to get their leaves pointed to any light they can sense. In fact, they will actually start to stretch their stem to try to get their leaves closer to that light. This is the case even on a windowsill that isn't getting enough direct sunlight. If you let this go unchecked for too many days, you'll end up with a weak, spindly plant that may not even be able to support its own leaves. And that's what we're seeing here. The worst case is the stem will be so weak that it will end up laying on the ground. So if you have seedlings that have become leggy, no need to worry, it's easy to fix. They'll be perfectly productive plants in your garden. It's just a simple process of transplanting. We need to gently dig the seedling out and replant it. You need a proper tool for that. Just using your fingers will be too cumbersome and you'll probably end up damaging the plant. So here are some possible tools that you might be tempted to use from around the house. I have a knitting needle, a meat skewer, a toothpick, a Chinese style chopstick, and a Japanese style chopstick. Now I wouldn't use the meat skewer or the toothpick because they're too sharp and you don't want to take the chance of damaging the seedling when you're manipulating it into the soil. So let's remove these. Secondly, the Chinese style chopstick is good. It's very smooth, that's what you want, but the end is too blunt. When you're working with very small seedlings, you need something that's tapered. So I would not want to use this particular tool. Many gardeners use it, but as you'll see later, I don't think it's a proper tool for our use. So both of these tools are excellent for manipulating the seedlings. They're both very smooth and tapered. They'll slide off the stems. They won't damage the plants very easily. But because you can't hold this in your hand very well, I'm going to discard the knitting needle. So my preference is the Japanese style chopstick. It sits well in your hand, it's got a good grip, it's perfect for manipulating the seedlings. This is my tool of choice. I'm preparing some new pots filled with some fortified potting soil. I made it with 3 parts peat moss, 2 parts compost, and 1 part coarse sand. I also moistened it. If it's too dry, the soil can possibly scratch the roots and stem and lead to more transplant shock. It has to be loose and not compressed at all. So using my tool, I'm going to gently dig out the plants and lay them out. You can see that these stems are way too long. Really, the soil should be at this point. So all this stem needs to be buried. So we're going to put these in individual pots. Again, they have to be fluffy. You can't put it into a compressed pot because you're going to damage the stems. So here, this is all fluffy. I'm just going to take this and we're just going to press it down in roots and all. Have to make sure the roots are covered. And 90% of the stem. So here we have a proper transplant. Let's go through the other ones. Again, just dig them out. When the roots are being pulled out, you want to be gentle on them as possible. So If you water it first, the soil will be lubricated so they'll come out easily. Again, it's very easy, just press it down. Pat the soil around, done. You have to be somewhat careful when you press down on these seedlings. The stems are fragile, but very flexible. I have some other examples that I'll show you. Here I have basil, celery, and parsley. What we need to do now is gently separate the seedlings and lay them out to be transplanted. So let's start with basil. I'm going to use my tool, of course, and we're going to start prying these seedlings out very carefully. And the roots are starting to get a little larger because they've been in the ground here for about a week and a half. We'll just start laying a few out. Fluff it up, press it down. These are little, quite fragile, but they can be manipulated with a little bit of force. So if you end up burying it a little bit too much, you can just pull them up a bit, they'll be okay. You want them maybe 1/4 of an inch above the soil. I'm not too happy with this one. Its leaves have not properly formed yet. Let's remove that. I'll replace it with something a little bit healthier. Just fluff it up again. There, much better. So let's tackle celery now. These are much more fragile and need much more care because they're very close together. Certainly my tool of choice is going to work well. If we were to use the Chinese style chopstick, you can see that it's too blunt. It's not going to do a good job to help separate these little seedlings. This will do a much better job. So same thing, we're going to just pry these out. You have to be much more careful than we were with the basil. Pull them out, and we're going to just lay them out to be transplanted. Should examine the roots too, that make sure that they're all intact. And we're just going to push it in. That was a very long root. This one, I noticed when I was planting it, did not have a very good root. So this may not survive. I just would rather, yeah, it's not a very good stem. I'd rather just get something better. Yes, this is much better. So for my final example, we've got parsley here. This is curly parsley. This is absolutely insane. You'd think by looking at these leggy seedlings that there's no way that they can be saved. They're beyond hope, but not to worry. We can manage this. We'll be able to salvage enough plants to put in our garden later in the season. So the first thing, we just have to make sure we gently pry them out. Just want to make sure that we're careful not to snap the roots. They're very tangled, so both the roots and the stem, so you're probably gonna snap a few if you're not careful enough. These are very difficult. We want to get like 90% of that stem underground. So we'll just start pushing all the way down. Again, you have to make sure the soil's fluffy enough so that it goes down without pressing too hard on the stem. looks good. All we need to do now is just give them a splash of water, but not too much. When the seedlings are this young, you don't want to give them too much water because the water could very well end up on the leaves and push them into the soil. You don't want to introduce any waterborne or soil-borne diseases. So here we have all of our successes. You can do this method on mostly any vegetable: peppers, cucumbers, eggplant, squash, any of the cabbage family members like kale, broccoli, cauliflower, and collard greens. Make sure they get plenty of direct sunlight. In a month or so, they'll be ready to be put in the garden. Thanks for watching, and please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. When you garden well, you'll eat well. Bye for now.